If you have a Brother knitting machine, eventually one of those buttons on the front is going to get stuck. It has happened to all of us. Today, Jack is going to show you how to unstick them.
Alright, typical Brother problem. There's two buttons right here, one on top of the other. We've got these working just fine. What we don't have is these two. If you'll notice, the top button is in, and it won't come back out. The bottom button, oh boy, it just ain't going to go anywhere.
People are used to looking at these with the button covers on, but they're off right now.
Right, and let me show you how this machine came to me. It came with the cover sitting on, came with everything in the bag, and the handle detached. That's not a problem. In fact, I told the lady, as long as I get all the parts, I can fix it. I'll put it back together. When I give it to you, it'll be ready to knit again. Now, what we're going to do is, we're going to go through first aid for these poor buttons. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of Aero Croil. See that?
Yes, and you also did a whole video on chemicals, which is very explanatory.
Now, since the cover's off and the buttons are off, we can go ahead and open it up so we can see what we're talking about. But basically, you can do this with the cover on, you can do it with the buttons on, because all we really want to do, and I'll show you, is get right down in here between those two buttons, because if you'll see what we're dealing with, everything is underneath this plate. And if you'll notice on the sides, when you see these things operating, there's two complete slide mechanisms underneath this plate, and there's just not a lot of room. Now, my suggestion is, and make sure my lovely camera person is following me, stand it up like I've done, this way. And you notice what I've got is my straw, and I'm going right between those plates. Whoops! But that's exactly what we want to do. We want to go right between those plates.
Yeah, we can see.
All right, and then tip it just a little bit. Do the same thing. Now this one, I gave all of these recommendations to this knitter. She's already tried them. But I'm telling you what you can do, and I've got proof. Anybody that was at the Carolina Guild seminar last year saw me repair the machine that Catherine was going to demonstrate with, doing this same thing. I croiled it, we let it sit for about an hour, and she demonstrated for 2 days, and the buttons worked fine. But if you'll notice, we're getting a little more action here, but we're still not getting that one out. Now, if you'll notice, I don't know if the camera can see right at the end of this, there's some marks where she actually pulled it out with a pair of pliers. That is not recommended to do that. If it won't go in and lock and stay in, and if it won't come out on its own, don't try to pull it out.
Well, let's review though. 99% or more of the time, what's wrong with those buttons is fixed with Croil. Is that correct?
That is correct. What it is there's too much crud buildup inside of there. Notice how much is moving over here on the sides when I push that? And you see how it's spring-loaded here and here?
Yep.
And it's also spring-loaded inside. So what we've got is that this is supposed to return everything to normal. This is your plain button on the cover. Right here. That's your plain button. You push it this way to release the buttons, and when you turn it loose, it spring-loads back. And that's exactly what it's doing. It's doing its job, but you'll notice this is not popping out.
So we need to go, in this one particular case, digging deeper.
Right. Now this will be the second one that I've ever worked on that I actually had to pull this plate off. The first one, the people that brought it to me had taken the plate off, and they had gotten it reassembled, but not quite right, and it just wouldn't knit the same way in both directions. I went in, I saw it was misadjusted, I readjusted it, and they left knitting like the wind.
So for most people, when the buttons come up, Croil them. Now, I hear all the time of the Hairdryer Fix.
Boy, let's go into the hairdryer. Yeah, a little bit of heat, judiciously applied, is not a bad way to free up old gummy grease or oil. However, We just did a whole video on we don't want oil in there.
Especially old gummy
oil.
Which it doesn't get younger or less gummy after it cools back off.
If you could apply a little bit of heat right here where my finger's at, but controlled where you knew how many degrees centigrade you were raising the temperature of this metal plate.
But a hairdryer doesn't allow for that.
No, hairdryer has typically two settings, hot and real hot. What you're doing is you're heating things you don't want to heat. That spring that's controlling that right there, all of these springs, as a matter of fact, what are they? They're a little piece of heat-tempered steel. So what's going to happen when you superheat one part of that piece of tempered...
Are we interfering with the tempering and making it not as strong?
You could end up with a broken spring.
Oh, we don't want that.
And there's a whole bunch of them inside of here, which is why I don't recommend that most people go into these. If you'll notice right here, you've got two anchor springs that are actually attached to, one here and two here, that are actually attached to this plate. And you see all these springs in here, they've got a little bit of tension on those rods that we're going to be moving when we push these buttons. And all of that takes place right inside of here. So that means they're all pivoting on their shafts, they're all spring-loaded into their positions, and they're held in their position by this
I remember
plate.
It's one of the things that takes even you the longest is to go in there and fix whatever and then reassemble all the springs.
Right. You got to do it very carefully because it will go spring. But that's exactly what it's not doing. When I'd hit the release, it should go spring, and it's not doing it. But the hairdryer is a temporary fix at best. And you don't really want to start heating up anything in here. You don't want to heat any of your nylon. And you certainly don't want to ruin the temper on any of these springs. You see how delicate that little spring wire is?
That one breaks pretty often, actually.
It does. And what will happen is, I'm going to put that back until I get ready, but what will happen is one of these coils on the end of the spring is where all the stress is on there. And if that little coil that holds it breaks, that spring's no good anymore. And I've told people I can sometimes find those springs, sometimes not. These are not simple compression springs. In a ballpoint pen, everybody's taking it apart and seeing that little compression spring in there.
And we all try to substitute them.
Yeah, they're a dime a dozen, and you can go to a machine store and you can buy thousands of those, but these are very specific. Try buying a spring for a carburetor. There's 1,000 different carburetors and 1,000 different springs of different sizes.
Now, if a person uses Croil and it does work, is that a complete fix, or does she need to go in some more?
Well, the Croil, again, as we say in our video, it's a 24-hour application. You Croil it up good, just like I'm doing right now. You soak this little guy as much as you can, inside and out, because all of these parts are interreacting to one another. And I'm going to go under the top rod and under the bottom rod and under. You see, this is a part of that mechanism right there. So that also needs to be lubricated, so I'm going to go underneath that.
Well, I understand that it'll loosen it up,
Right.
but I was remembering you saying that we would just as soon not leave oils inside, and you'd rather have us put silicone inside.
All right, now we are going to address that situation. We don't want to leave the Croil in. We don't want to repeat the problem by having a hydrocarboniferous substance hanging around in there. Now the Croil is a creeping oil, and it's supposed to creep on out. But what we're going to do is we're going to help it. We're going to use the LPS1. We're going to repeat the process that we did to put the Croil in. We're going to go through each one of these channels. The only difference is I'm not going to do it now because I've got to go into this machine. But the only difference is we're going to spray it in here till it foams out there. And then you know you've washed it, and you pick it up just like we started. You hold it at an angle, and you start at the very top, and you go to washing behind that one and that one and that one and that one. And you notice I got my little pig blanket underneath it. I would use a double pig blanket, and maybe a piece of cardboard, because depending on the surface that you're on, and you just want to keep washing through there until you get a nice little
question for you. if there is rust or fuzz or other foreign matter of the kind that likes to learn to dwell in our knitting machines, will the process of the coil followed by the LPS get it out safely enough?
It will. It's not as good as a soak into Marvel Mystery Oil. But again, let's cover that briefly. If we were to soak this carriage in Marvel Mystery Oil, when we got it out, we'd do the same thing. We'd get our LPS 1 and we'd completely wash it down. This side, and then we go around to this side. And that
we have another whole video on disassembling in Marvel Mystery Soaking.
That's right. But anytime we use an oil, we want to get it out and displace it. That's what the LPS 1 is best for. It foams in. The oil's not going to stick where the silicone is. And since the oil is heavier than the silicone, if you hold it up, the oil will roll off the silicone molecule and it'll be out of there.
That's why that works. Cool.
Yes.
We all done here?
Yes, we are. Next thing's exploratory surgery on this one.